From my childhood, my family, particularly my parents, and my church taught me that generosity was foundational to our faith. In fact, when you're a little kid, it's not even really about your faith. Generosity is foundational to being a decent human being. In fact, in our family, we were expected to earn our allowance. There were a list of chores, and you got paid for whichever chores you got done, and you didn't get paid for the ones you didn't get done, and you were expected to tithe from your allowance. It was so annoying. And it wasn't until I was in high school that I began to get a glimpse of the idea that generosity wasn't just about money. Because as a Christian, the generous life wasn't just about money. I'm sure my pastor tried to explain this to me in confirmation. But as I have shared with you before, I was possibly the world's worst confirmation student. I spent most of my time in the women's bathroom where, God bless his soul, Reverend Larry Lavelle had to come find me. I found out later that only about 3 or 4 years after our family left the Bellevue United Methodist Church, Reverend Larry Lavelle relocated to the Methodist Church in Iowa. I don't think I did that personally, but there you were. Anyway, it wasn't until I was in college and I was walking from UCLA to the Westwood United Methodist Church to sing in their choir, which was quite an experience. And one day, the sermon was, well, anyway, I decided to flip through the pages of the hymnal. Now, anytime you find my sermon boring, you are welcome to quietly flip through the pages of the hymnal. And I'm about to explain why. First, when I did that, I found John Wesley's instructions for singing. Don't look those up right now because you'll embarrass yourself by laughing out loud. What I discovered, though, was something that I just know, God bless his soul, Reverend Larry Lavelle must have taught me in confirmation. Surely I stood in front of the church and affirmed it. But it's page 38 in the United Methodist Hymnal. You don't have to look it up now, but it's there. And we ask this question to confirmands and people, any adults joining the church. As members of Christ's universal church, will you be loyal to the United Methodist Church and do all in your power to strengthen its ministries? You notice it does not say you will agree with everything that the general boards and agencies of the United Methodist Church have to say. It doesn't say we are the one and only true church and we get everything right. It doesn't even say that you might not learn something good from other churches, other denominations, probably even other faiths. What it does mean is that Christianity is a team sport. Christianity is a team sport. Your Christianity is not really about your individual beliefs or your saying the right things or agreeing with the right things so you can punch your ticket to heaven. I mean, that's a whole different conversation. It does mean being a part of a community. And that's where this really interesting part, well, the part that caught my attention that day shows up. On that same page it says, as members of this congregation, will you faithfully participate in its ministries? Participate in the community. Will you participate in the community? And here's how. Prayers, presence, gifts, service, and witness. Now, in fact, if you dig into your hymnal later, you will see that that witness word isn't there. It was added about 15 years ago, and we just didn't go out and buy all new hymnals. Prayers, presence, gifts, service, witness. These are 5 ways we affirm a life of living generously. I want to invite you to listen for just a minute to the Apostle Paul as he writes to the church in Corinth. He says, now, as you excel in everything, in faith, in speech, in knowledge, in utmost eagerness, and in our love for you. So we want you to excel also in this generous undertaking. I don't say this as a command, but I am testing the genuineness of your love against the earnestness of others. In other words, in my mind, I'm comparing you to the Macedonian church because they're really good at this, and I don't have to remind them about being generous. For you know the generous act of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sakes he became poor, so that by his poverty you may become rich. This is not about money. This is a spiritual metaphor. And in this matter, Paul says, I'm giving my advice. And Paul's really pretty clear. Sometimes Paul will say, I heard this from the Lord. In other words, I got a direct communication from Jesus. On this case, he's saying, here's my advice. Here's my opinion. It is appropriate for you, who began last year, not only to do something, but to even desire to do something. You were still just learning to want to be generous. Now, finish doing it, so that your eagerness may be matched by completing it according to your means. For if the eagerness is there, the gift is acceptable. If the eagerness is there, the gift is acceptable, according to what one has, not according to what one does not have. The measuring stick for a life of generosity is eagerness. I do not mean, he says, that there should be relief for others and a burden on you. It is a question of fair balance between your present abundance and their need, so that their abundance may be for your need in order that there may be a fair balance. As it is written, and this is just great. The one who had much did not have too much, and the one who had little did not have too little. That's the goal, is that the one who has much doesn't have too much, doesn't have so much that it damages them spiritually, and that the one who has little does not have so little that it damages them spiritually. What a concept. Those who have much shouldn't have so much that it damages them or others. Those who have too much, that damages other people. Those who have too little who have little shouldn't have too little, because when those who have little don't have enough, that also damages our whole community. Now, you will have noticed, I think, while I was reading, Paul was usually a scold. Paul was not very pastoral. I'm not sure how he succeeded in churches. But he must have had some pastoral sensibilities, because like any sensible pastor, he starts by flattering them a little bit. Since you excel in all these things, you excel in this and this and this and this and this. And really, guys in Corinth, I don't want to talk to you about money, but apparently I have to. Pastors don't like that. If you ever stand around a water cooler circle of pastors or go to a party with pastors and listen to them talk, one of the things most of them hate about their job is fundraising. I'm not that pastor. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I guess that hasn't changed for most pastors in 1,000 years. And most people really don't want to talk about God and money. But I love to talk about God and money. It makes me very popular at parties. Paul is at one of his most rhetorically skilled moments with this, as he weaves together honor and shame, which is very important in his culture, overridingly important. Honor and shame, it's impossible to describe how deeply embedded and how overridingly important honor and shame was in his culture, and still is in many places. Devotion to the Lord makes its way into his conversation, obligation, a little bit of guilt, some encouragement, some praise, all in an effort to persuade the Corinthians to send some money to Jerusalem. Now, Paul was not on good terms with the church in Jerusalem. This is the Peter and Paul disagreement. They were, let's say, theological opponents. He felt that the Jerusalem church was too obsessed with people got to be Jews in order to be Christians, and the Jerusalem church thought Paul going out to the Gentiles, and this all revolves around circumcision. I'm not going to talk about that. It was all about them not getting along, and yet Paul expects the Corinthians, mostly Gentiles in the Corinthian church, to be generous with the church at Jerusalem. He's working hard to raise money for them. And they are to be generous with their time, their talent, their presence with one another. Generosity was a very different ballgame in Paul's time. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Jewish part of it. Although the church in Corinth had some Jews, it was mostly Gentiles. And for the general culture, the non-Jewish culture, it's basically a Greco-Roman culture, but the Roman Empire was a big place and there was a big mishmash, but there was a lot of core Roman values that were everywhere. And generosity, what we would call charity or even philanthropy, was a very different thing. Very different thing. People during Paul's time, and he was a Roman too, he was a Roman citizen, were not accustomed to what we would call charity, widespread, organized charity that comes from good feeling or religious obligation. Those who had been Jews understood that a little bit, and I'll tell you about that in just a minute, but not the general culture. Now, there were some state welfare programs, particularly for widows and veterans and orphaned children. There were some acts of private generosity, but they differed very much in purpose and scope to what we think of as charitable giving. And this kind of charitable giving that we tend to think of charitable giving, philanthropy, is really only just getting started with Paul, and he is bringing to the Gentiles a completely different idea because Paul was Jewish. And his Christianity is first and foremost Jewish, and it flows out of his Judaism, like Jesus. The Roman culture did not have a concept of this. They had a word, philanthropy, philo, love, anthropy, anthropomorphic humans. So philanthropy, while we commonly use that as a word about charity and generosity, philanthropy is about love for humankind. They would have used that word, but they would have seen it as a way to acquire social status. If you're a good citizen, a good member of the community, I'm not sure this is a bad idea, then you give. You give to libraries, where they'll put your name on it. You give to theaters, where they'll put your name on it. You help build the temples to the various Roman gods, and they'll put your name on it. But generosity from the heart, as a form of loving humanity, was not a social value. Now, I don't think that means nobody did it. I don't think that humankind suddenly 2,000 years ago developed out of nowhere, the milk of human kindness. It just wasn't a social value. Jews, on the other hand, did have a religious and cultural concept of philanthropy. It's called tzedakah, and it means righteousness. It's commonly used to express charity, but that's not really its source. It's an ethical obligation. In Judaism, giving, generosity, is not properly charity. It's a way to create equality and justice. It's a way for there to be justice and equality among all the people. So it's fundamentally the idea that we empower poor people to support themselves in developing their talents and skills. And that isn't always what happens, but there is a religious obligation to do what is just and right. The religious obligation to do what is just and right. So doing justice is more important than feeling kindness in the Jewish construct. Now, in the Middle Ages, Moses Maimonides conceived of this fascinating 8-level hierarchy. Starts with you donate, but with reluctance and regret, because your dad made you tithe your allowance, but I don't carry around resentment, and I wouldn't want you to think so. Happily donating, but giving less than what should be given. And then donating, but only after being asked. Donating before being asked. Donating when the recipient knows you donated, but you don't know the recipient. And then donating where both donor and recipient are anonymous. But the highest order is helping another person to become self-supportive. The highest form of charity. And that's not to say that those other forms don't matter. You got to feed somebody before they can be self-supporting. You got to educate them before they can be self-supporting. They have to have freedoms to be self-supporting. Verse 9 there. For now, the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sake he becomes poor, so that by his poverty you might become rich. It's just this pithy summary of the whole gospel. And it's been described as the New Testament economy of God. This is God's economy as we learn about it in the New Testament. And in God's economy, we are called to radical generosity. Now, I want to be clear what radical generosity is. It is not, as Paul tells us, that you should be impoverished in order for someone else to be comfortable. You're not to be burdened so that someone else may be unburdened. You give from what you have, not from what you don't have. But here's the thing, radical generosity is transformational. Radical generosity is transformational. And I know that every single person sitting in this room has experienced a transformational gift by giving it or receiving it. A gift of friendship, a gift of listening, a financial gift, a gift of hope. Radical generosity is transformational. It changes the giver and the receiver. Now think about that for a moment. Are the gifts you give of your time, your talent, your words, transformational for you, for someone else? Is your financial spirit generous enough to help you change your heart? Is your giving, your financial giving, going to change your heart as much as it helps the recipient? And how about your life? Does the gift of your life witness radical generosity in ways that transform others and your own heart? You know, it's not a question of giving 60 hours a week to a worthwhile organization, although we have things for you to do if you have some time. It's not about how many zeros follow your financial gift, although I like zeros. I like zeros. It's the delight that you experience from growing a generous spirit. It takes discipline and willingness. It starts slow. It grows, but it rewards you with this rich, full, joy-filled life. And too many times we talk about, give till it hurts. Well, I don't buy into that, although, frankly, I don't care what kind of mood you're in, right? But what happens is when we teach ourselves little by little the small discomforts of training ourselves to be generous, what looked like a handicap, what looked like a boundary, what looked like a prison turns into freedom. And as soon as you start, you'll begin to feel it. There's a great sense of freedom, and this living generously, I believe, is what the gospel means when it talks about freedom in Jesus Christ. Take note. Paul tells the Corinthians to be generous out of what you have, according to what you have, not according to what you do not have. He does not mean the other should be eased and you burdened. And we do this through prayers, presence, gifts, service, and witness. For some years now, we have been using the tagline, "Live Generously." And during that time, I have come to have a deeper and deeper understanding of the phrase. In fact, I have come to believe that I can say with some confidence that live generously kind of sums up the whole life and teaching of Jesus. Right in those two words, live generously. Learn how to live generously. Live in the joy and delight of generosity. And in the many years of this church's past, live generously, in fact, does sum up the identity of this church. All the stories I've heard over the years from some of you who have been here for 137 years or were born here, and you remember your grandparents' friends who were here, the stories I hear from you are about generosity, and not just financial generosity, generosity of spirit, willingness to take some risks so that in the 50s and 60s, our African American friends knew they were welcomed here. And I've seen in my 8 years here, transformation of lives as people live in subtle ways, step by step, into a more generous life in all the ways. It's who we have historically been. And I believe that is the future. The future isn't whether the building stands or falls. The future isn't whether we are famous because our pastor's on TV. That is just not going to happen. Living generously is our future in our prayers, our presence, our gifts, our service, and our witness. And so I want to invite you to just think for a minute. I'm going to walk you through a sort of prayer meditation. Just take a minute. And then we'll have a congregational response on the screen that you are free to join or not join. We ask ourselves, are my prayers, are our prayers generous prayers? Are we a generous presence whenever we enter a room? Is our church a generous presence in our community and in the world? Do I use my gifts generously? Do I serve from the heart? And do my words and my life and my Facebook page spread goodwill and generosity of spirit? If you can say yes to some or all of these things, or you just want to say yes to wanting to be more like that, I hope you will say with me this: yes, God being my helper, I am committed to this. If you are willing to say that with me, please say it now. Yes, God being my helper, I am committed to this. May it be so for us in the days to come. Amen.